Hey, we're live. It's not 7 o'clock. It's actually 5 o'clock. So we're getting an early start tonight. And I've got a bunch of stuff I've got to get done later on tonight. So I want to get things going early tonight. We've got a lot of stuff to talk about. One is a video that I just posted, which is the 2.2 liter Dodge. And what people don't realize is that this motor was in a 1984 Dodge 600. So that was a long time ago. And that's why I kind of wanted to start it. I was really hoping that we could put it up on the dyno. I was hoping when I got the rear wheel drive bell housing from the Dakota that it would just bolt on. But unfortunately, that bell housing did not help us, at least not entirely. It did not allow us to bolt it up to the dyno. So what we'll have to do is, already talked to John Mahovitz. He came over and took a look at it. I just need to get him that bell housing and another bell housing, and then he can make the magic intermediate plate to join those two things together, or rather to join the bell housing from the 2.2 that we have to the dyno. And it's just a change in pattern, so it's not really terribly difficult. And the nice thing is it's easy to get it centered, because the opening that's in the bell housing on the 2.2 is bigger than the opening that we have for most of the other bell housings that we run on the dyno. So since he's really good with he's a good machinist, it's just a matter of turning down circles to different diameters. You could line the two bell housings up. You could get the center lines on both of them. You could transfer the patterns. He's going to be able to make short work of this because the guy's really, really good at it. So hopefully we can get that done on my next trip down there. And then the cool thing is, as you saw in the video, hopefully you guys welcome everybody from Texas, and Uncle Squirrel and Dean and Tyler, Jason, Mike, Tyler again. Tyler's here twice. All right. Serious Vet. Hopefully we can get it up and running again, because as you saw in the video, it did start up and run. I want to check. I'm curious about the oil pressure on it. I mentioned that in the video. Hopefully we can get it running and make sure that it works. I kind of want to take it apart and maybe look, just, peek at the bearings and stuff, and even check the, I want to check the pickup and just look inside and see. I haven't taken the valve cover off or anything. We want to take a look inside and just kind of make sure that it's all okay, that there's not cobwebs in there or rocks and sticks and, that kind of thing. So I may do that before we run it again, but we put oil in it and hook the oil pressure gauge up, and it does have oil pressure, which is good. I just want to make sure when I put it on, because getting the dyno time is a lot of times is difficult. And I want to make sure that we can maximize the available dyno time. So while it's there, I want to make sure that it's good and that it runs, which we now know that it does. All we did was throw some 24-pound injectors in it. And now it will run with whatever size injector we want to put in there, which is going to be pretty cool. And we won't have to rely on the factory ECU, which is much more problematic. So we can run it with the Holley, which I can do all the tuning on. That way I can make sure that this thing is like dead repeatable, and we don't have to worry about results happening that are the result of us not being able to tune it and have the same air fuel and the same timing and that kind of stuff. So it's really going to be cool. I'm excited about running the draw through setup on the turbo. And then I'm also excited about running that setup and then making, we're going to add intercoolers to them. We're obviously going to run the 85. We're run big injectors. We'll try different ignition timing levels and see what this thing responds to. We're definitely going to try different intake manifolds, and I have a few different ones already to try. I probably will make one also and make it adjustable like I like to do, because that's kind of a cool deal. We can show the effective runner length, although the T1, T2 stuff is going to kind of do that. The other thing that I got in the mail, thank you for the gentleman that sent me that, he sent me a naturally aspirated intake with the throttle body injection on it. Now we're not going to use the throttle body injection, but we can run the NA intake manifold. And I just hear myself say that and think, oh yeah, there's not going to be injectors in there probably. So I'm going to have to figure out how to make that work. I'd like to run that intake manifold on a turbo application, so we might have to put injector bungs in it, which is not a big deal. He also sent me the stock exhaust manifold for the NA motor, which we can run, because what I would like to do is run this thing NA, and I could run it with we could even run it with one of the turbo manifolds, which is not a big deal, and run it NA and just make sure that it makes the power that we want it to as an NA deal. And the reason I want to start there is, and then that way we can see when we add all of these different turbo versions to it, we can find out how well they're doing and say, okay, look, it made this much NA and now it's making this much under boost, and we can see how well it fits to the formula, which will be good, because a lot of these 2.2 liter turbo deals, they're going to require a lot of boost. The other thing about this is I sent out the 2.2 G head to David Vizard, and he's going to take a look at it and port it. I cleaned it up as best I could with my steam cleaner and spent about an hour doing that. And I think I got most of it on myself rather than cleaning the head off. But we cleaned it off pretty good, and that's all shipped out. So hopefully he'll get it, and we'll get to do some videos together on what it flows stock, and then all of the upgrades that he's going to do to it. So that'll be very good. Naturally, we're going to have to do one or more camshafts in this thing also, because you know that this thing is going to respond to camshafts, because the factory cams are going to be definitely mild in comparison to other things that you could get out there in the aftermarket. Any of these motors are going to respond to a 206, a 210, a 218, 224 kind of cam. They just all do, and this one will be, I'm sure, no exception, because it's an 8-valve head. Even after porting, it's not going to flow a ton. It's going to need the extra airflow. It's going to need cam timing. It's going to need runner length. And then we can get to whatever we can get to on the NA version, and then we can start adding boost. And I'm also going to take this stock exhaust manifold and make an adapter plate to go from the weird specialized, I don't know why OEMs do this, but the weird specialized exhaust flange to a standard T3 and or T4 flange, probably a T3 for most of these motors, depending on, until we get pretty far up there. But even with a T3 hybrid deal, a T3, T4, we can make a lot of power. And I think that this thing is going to respond to a T3 probably better for most of what we're doing. Anything in the 200, 300, even 400, and we've gone on up to 500, like a GT30 582 kind of turbo. All of those are going to work with this. And this way, the other thing that allows me to do is if I make an adapter plate, it's going to stand the turbo off a little bit, and it's going to get it out from under that log manifold. That will allow me to run an intercooler in the log manifold. Honestly, I think what we're going to do is ultimately we're going to get rid of that T1 manifold, because it's just looking at it, it's not going to be very good. And then we'll run the longer runner manifolds, and then we'll run it. And then also when we do that, we'll also get rid of the draw through throttle body, and then we'll be blowing through the throttle body. And that way the throttle body won't be a restriction on the inlet side, because it definitely is. It definitely will be the way that we're running this. So I don't know how far we can push that. What I'd like to do is turn the boost up on the turbo with the draw through throttle body in its place. I would also like to run an intercooler, because if we're going to turn the boost up and then run E85, and then find out how much of a restriction that throttle body is, because we can take vacuum readings between the throttle body and the turbo and go, oh, look, there's an inch, 3 inches, 5 inches, 6 inches of vacuum, whatever it is, at these different power levels. And then that will tell people, oh, hey, look, that thing's definitely a restriction. And the cool thing about that is that we can, with, simple silicone adapters, we can put very large throttle bodies on there that are going to be much bigger than the inlet going into the turbo anyway. So we can put really big throttle openings on there and demonstrate what those do. Ultimately, what I think is we'll get to the point where the throttle valve itself flows a lot more than the inlet of that turbo does. So that's one thing that when we put the other style turbos on that don't have that exact flange, that we will be able to run turbos with different size inlets and stuff on them and not be a restriction. So there's a lot of cool stuff there. There's a lot of neat stuff there that I want to know about that particular motor. And then obviously we're going to show different things getting up in power. I want to run it NA. I want to run it with nitrous. We want to run it intercooled and non-intercooled, all of that stuff. So that'll be very cool in the 2.2. Hopefully you guys also got to take a look at the last video that I put up, and that was a comparison between the 3800 Series 3 motor and the 4200 Atlas Marabera motor. And then we ran both of them stock. Now the 3800 obviously had the benefit of having forced induction because it had that M90 supercharger on it. And the Atlas had the benefit of all of the things that we listed. It was bigger, it had higher compression, it had, 4-valve heads that had a better intake manifold. It had variable cam timing. So it essentially made more power than the Atlas in naturally aspirated trim made more power than the Series 3 did in supercharged trim. And so thinking that that levels the playing field, obviously we added turbos to both of those. And the interesting thing is that even adding a similar amount of boost to those base motors, that it ended up producing a similar power curve, even though the boost level on the supercharged combination, because it was a compound now, was much higher in the manifold. The boost between the blower and the turbo was going to be within a pound or so of what the boost that we were running on the Atlas motor. And so it makes for a good comparison. The other thing that I didn't do until fairly recently, and maybe you guys have done this already, is I was thinking that we were running 23.3 pounds on the compound setup for the 3800, running the turbo feeding the supercharger. And I thought, man, that seems like a lot of boost, that this thing really isn't making very much power at that boost level. Because I'm thinking, 23 pounds, this thing should be, 500 or 550 horsepower or whatever. But if you do the math and you get rid of the blower out of the equation and look at that boost level versus whatever this motor made naturally aspirated. Now, the naturally aspirated versions of these motors with higher compression make about 200 horsepower. But this one is not going to make that. So I'm thinking that it's going to be 175 or 180 horsepower range for the NA version. And then if you do the math at 23 pounds at 180 horsepower, it comes really close to what we're seeing there, what we got. So it makes me wonder, and everybody wants me to do this, and they've all made comments about it, and this is part of the plan anyways, is we want to run now just the turbo at that boost level, and then we're going to see a number of things. One, we're going to see the response rate of the turbo by itself without the blower helping things out. But we're also going to see if the turbo by itself is going to make more power than the turbo and the blower did on this combination. And honestly, I think it might be fairly close on this particular combination. So we'll see. But the other thing that I want to do is I want to take the blower off and run this thing naturally aspirated. I'm trying to figure out how to do it, because the naturally aspirated power output of this motor, of the 3800 Series 3, is going to be less with that blower manifold than it would be with a long runner like any of the NA front wheel drive 3800 Series 2 or 3 intake manifolds. It's going to make less power with the blower manifold because it's just such short runner. Now, it might make the same peak power or maybe a little more at the very top past the power peak on the really short runner deal. I don't think it's going to do that, but it might. It's definitely going to make a lot less in the middle and everywhere in there. And that's one of the things that I'm questioning about running the turbo. What manifold do I use? Now, one of the things I want to do is we'll just gut the blower, take the rotor pack out of it, and then cap it, and then run that and blow through the blower like we have been, so that we're using the same manifold and we're using the blower kind of as a big common plenum. We can try that. And then we can also try a long runner manifold like the F-body one or like any of the front wheel drive ones. And a lot of things that the guys mentioned, obviously, is that the intake manifold on the NA versions have the injectors in the manifold. And then on the supercharged stuff, it's actually in the cylinder head. Is that right? Yeah, or vice versa. I think that's right. One of them has them in the head and one of them has in the intake manifold, but that won't stop us from making the test. All we have to do is plug those holes just so it doesn't leak, obviously, and it won't, because if we just have injectors in there, we can facilitate that and make that happen. And it's not a big deal. We've done that actually before, where we've had multiple sets of injectors and things, and a lot of times we don't even run them. We just use them to plug them. I've run that where we've run a single plane intake that has injector bungs in it, and then we run it carbureted, and then we put a 4-hole throttle body and run an EFI. Well, while it's running carbureted, we just plug those holes with the injectors that are there to do that anyway. So it all works out. So I'd like to run that. The other thing that I want to do that I haven't seen somebody do, and this will help us know how efficient this motor is under these boost levels, is that I want to run this motor NA. Again, I'm stuck with the same conundrum here is, do I run it with the open blower feeding the stock manifold, or do I just run it with a long runner manifold? We know if I put a long runner manifold on it that the torque is going to be way up from 6,000 RPM down. But I still want to do that. That way we can, like I said, we can correlate all of these values and go, okay, look at it made 181 horsepower. And then so at 14.5 pounds or so, it should make double that. And then we can go, okay, it did or didn't. And then we can kind of evaluate it. But only if we have the NA power level can we actually do that and use the formula. It's very important. So cool stuff on the 2.2 liter turbo, cool stuff on the comparison between the 4200 and the 3800. And not surprisingly, the 4200 having, being a new generation of motor, being a lot more efficient, being bigger, having all those things that we discussed going for it, it's not surprising that it would do so well under boost. And there are a lot more mods that we're going to do to that as well. We're going to turn the boost up. We have now the short block and stuff put together with ring gap. We're going to do a ported head. Right now, the head has just been fixed with a valve job and surfaced, and so we know that it's basically a good stock head. We also have a good 2006 head. I just need to get the rest of the springs for that so that the 2006 head can also go together, so I can do a head swap. The other thing that will facilitate that on the Atlas motor is that we'll have head studs and head gaskets, and that we don't have to worry about snapping all the head bolts like I did last time, which was like super awesome. So the 4200, definitely, if you go boost to boost, because it's starting with, if we're starting with near 180 horsepower NA on the 3800, we're starting with essentially another 100 horsepower on the Atlas motor. And then a lot of guys brought up other V6s like the LV3 and stuff that we could run that are making even more power. So as we get more technology and we advance and the years go by, these things just get replaced by things that are better and better. And that's pretty normal. The reason that I do this is not to pick the best one, because usually the latest one is going to be the best one. It's also going to be the most expensive. But I'm not trying to do this based on cost. I'm just doing this for people that have those motors. There's lots of guys out there that still have 3800s that are modifying them, especially in Australia. So shout out to my friends there in Australia. They're doing it and they're making lots of power. So they want to see what happens. They want to see these kinds of tests. Same thing with the 4200. Same thing, I'm sure, with the LV3 when we start doing that. Lots of guys have mentioned a lot of other motors. The North Star motor. The Tim wants the it's not high energy, high efficiency or whatever, the 3.9 liter V6. So there's a lot of things to test. There's a shortage of that. I just have a shortage of room and a shortage of time to get to all of that stuff. So let's see what you guys got going on and see what do you guys think about the 2.2 and the 3800 and the 4200. Yeah, 3800 injectors are in the head. So what are you guys talking about? It's some sort of 5.7. Saul, with external mods, exhaust, induction systems, etc., do you ever adjust timing? Yeah, we normally go through a timing sweep again when we make a change, but a lot of times it doesn't do anything. It doesn't change it at all. Did everybody see on PFI Speed make 956 horsepower completely stock engine? What was completely stock, or what kind of motor is that? I don't even know what motor it is that you're talking about. Let's see. A J Series Honda is definitely on the list. It's on the to-do list, but it's going to have to wait for a while. High value V6. Okay, there we go. I know it's high something. Yeah, there are a lot of 4200s in the yards. I do see a lot of those. They're pretty common. You should do a comparison of the GM 2.7 liter versus the 3800 and the 4200. So you have a J series making 509 wheel horsepower at 10 pounds. That's good. Casual Customs. I watch your injector sizing video. Very nice. My question is, how do you size it when target horsepower is unknown? You have to have a range to know what size injector to put in. You don't pick it. You have to pick an injector based on the flow rate, and the flow rate is determined by the power output. So you just pick something that will be more than what the power output of the motor is going to be. If you pick it and it's less, then bad things are going to happen. Interested in seeing how E85 responds to the T1 log intake without an intercooler, the stock head and bottom end. We know what E85 is going to do. It does the same thing as it does in every other motor that we run it in. It's definitely going to make more power. The log intake is fundamentally flawed. It's really short runner. I haven't looked in there to see how the distribution would be, but it's probably not going to be great. Although Dodge did put the little crosshair diverter in there to ensure that all of the right amount of airflow went into each one of the cylinders. I don't think it actually does that. And also just the runner length alone is not beneficial. If you put a T2, either a one piece or two piece manifold, anything with runner length in it, it's going to make a lot more power than the log manifold will. For a long time, and even especially back in 1984 or 85, guys were thinking that you need to make that as short as possible so that you can get the boost in there as quickly as possible. That's not the way it works. There probably are timing marks on the flex plate. That's how they normally time them in the car. But we made it a lot easier by just by TDCing the motor and then putting it on the outside so we could see it. It's having it hooked up on the stand is a little different. A high rev bike motor, yeah, that's going to be hard to run on the engine dyno. Richard, are you running out of video ideas yet? There's a never-ending list of things that I want to test, so no, there's no shortage of that. Is the Jeep AMC 2.5 liter 4-cylinder capable of making 200 horsepower? What does the thing make stock? I don't know what that motor's rated as. Is it if it's a 2.5 liter? I'm hoping that it's rated at 90 or 100 horsepower. When are you and Rob Dom going to hook up? Has Rob reached out to me? Should I remember a discussion that we had? So Robert, you're running 2200 cc injectors on your LSV Tech and 1000 cc's on my V6 turbo. Yeah, and that's the thing, because if you have ultimately you're trying to make a certain amount of power per cylinder. So if you're trying to make 1,000 horsepower with a 4-cylinder, you got to have a lot bigger injector than making 1,000 horsepower with a 6-cylinder or an 8-cylinder or a 10-cylinder. What about the old Quad 4 HO? Those are good too. I've only ever seen one of those in the wrecking yard. The Sunbird Turbo, I haven't seen any of those in the wrecking yard though, although I do remember them. 351 Cleveland can be turbo just like everything else. Lots of those in Panteras. One of the GM engines that will be flooding the junkyard is the 2-liter LTG. Yeah, those 80s turbo cars did have torque steer, but that's okay. That's part of the fun. You should be holding onto the steering wheel. It shouldn't be like, you know, arm resting it and do it in full wrist mode. Tyler, you're going to build a, I'm sure that you mean mid-plate, right? A mid-plate design for 3800. Still like to see an 80 showdown 2.8 liter Chevy versus a 2.8 liter Datsun. So you want to do a 2.8 liter V6 Chevy with a 2.8 liter inline, like an L28 motor. Those are, don't remember the last time I saw one of those in the yard either. How many engines do you own? I don't know how many that is right now. It's probably, I don't know, it's got to be 15 or 20, I would imagine. Pontiac had a turbo 3.1 Grand Prix back in the day. They also had that twin dual cam 3.4 liter. The sensor on the distributor for the 2.2 is weird, and it doesn't, we couldn't get it to, we couldn't get a signal from it with the Holly, so we put the crank sensor for the LS in there, and then it worked perfect. What software tune did you run for the compound setup? We ran a Holly HP management system on it. Let's see. Yeah, I like the quad fours. I wish I could have bought that 442 that was at the wrecking yard. That was a nice car. Looked like he used a Dakota bell housing when starting the 2.2 on the stand. The 3rd gen super transmission will bolt up the backside of the bell housing. Well, that's all well and good, but we don't need a transmission behind that bell housing. We need that bell housing to bolt to the dyno. That's the problem. Big Bang at 289. That's not on the list. I also have an L67 3800, buddy. It has problems with it. A few cylinders are down or dead, so we have to take the heads off and find out what's going on. I'm hoping that the pistons are still good. I'm hoping that it's just the cylinder heads, which is fairly normal on those things. They crack, and the valve seats are bad, and then the valve job is bad also. So I'm hoping that that's what it is, and we can fix the heads. The bottom ends on those seem fairly robust. Quad 4 Fiero is would be kind of my ultimate thing. Although I do like the V6 supercharged Fieros too; those are good. I don't have a way to hook a VR6 up. Thank you, Mr. Rebel. Why do people say you can't make 1,000 wheel horsepower through full exhaust? Planning on trying with Hooker Blackheart manifolds, 76, 75 precision on a 6-liter. Here's the problem you're going to have. A 76, 75 precision probably will do it. If you are using the Hooker turbo manifolds, you're going to have a lot of back pressure in that with the cross under tube. You should do it with some other kind of exhaust. If you're trying to make 1,000 wheel horsepower, you're gonna struggle with that. Whoa, where did my camera go? Wow, it just flipped out all of a sudden. Come on. Come on back. Shh, look. There we go. Now you're kind of happy. Now what happened to my green screen there? Huh? I was all freaking out. Let's see. Yeah, come on. Ta-da! Like, man, oh, it's still flipping out here. It does not want to go there. It's not happy. .23 psi, no ring gap. Yeah, but it's 23 psi compound though, so it's not the ring gap is not boost, it's temperature. Mike, I just converting my 85 GLH to T2, one-piece intake, ported head, 88 turbo roller cam, forged piston, A55 trans, still tuning it somewhat, but I'm looking forward to seeing your... That sounds like a good combination. My concern is what's better to move timing forward 4 degrees or 4 degrees back. Procom camshaft sprockets to... I don't know. I've never tried those. I've never run those sprockets, and I don't know where your cams are now, because on 4-valve motors, if it's a Ford, I'm assuming that it is. If it's a Ford 544 valve, we found the cam timing to be off side to side by as much as 9 or 10 degrees. So you have to degree the cams to find out where they are and then make them the same, and then adjust them a little bit to find out what you want to do, or to find out what they will do. Sometimes they don't do anything. Sometimes all you do is lose power. Sometimes you gain power down low and add it up and then lose it at the top. And if you go the other way, sometimes you gain power up top and lose it down below. So there's no one answer there. The thumbnail's upside down again. I don't know what's going on. I'm gonna have to work that thing over a little bit. TS302, I am going to run the 3800 with just the turbo with no blower. Uh, 23 psi equals a bunch of temperature, but it could equal a bunch of inlet charge temperature, but that doesn't necessarily equate to ring temperature, because you could run something at 10 pounds for a long period of time and you'd have more ring temperature than you would with 23 pounds at a short period of time. And honestly, I don't know what the charge temperature was. It was a hot day. We had an air to water intercooler. We had the turbo blowing into the blower. So it would be colder than it would be if the blower was trying to struggle to make 23 pounds, but not as good as if the turbo was doing it. When you hear pump gas, do you think 91 or 93 octane? And do you think there's an honest difference? There is going to be a difference between those two octane points, because look at it as a percentage going from 91 to 93. 2 points versus 91 is a bigger percentage than 2 points is of 100 or 120. So there is a difference between those two. And when we say pump gas, when I'm testing a Westech, we only think 91, because that's all that we have. When we go to the pump, we have 91. We don't have 93. Or if they do, they have it in very rare instances. Mostly it's 91. Dan, I think it's a better question on what size engine you could put it on. You could put it on any size engine. It's going to be more a function of how responsive it is if you put it on a really small engine, and then what the lack of flow is going to be on a bigger engine. Because even on a 12.7 liter Detroit diesel engine, the turbo is not designed to make 1,000 horsepower. It might make 1,000 foot-pounds, but it might not make 1,000 horsepower. So you have to... the diesel turbo, you have to put on something that's going to be making the kind of power that the turbo was designed for. How bad is 150-degree intake temp on an NA track car? If it's an intercooled deal, I'd want to see it lower than that, but lots of guys run that. I don't think he wants to put that turbo on a 632. I don't think that would be enough turbo. Ian, no, the turbo is never just freewheeling. I mean, the supercharger is never just freewheeling. It's always working. It's always pumping air. In fact, when you add airflow from the turbo into the blower, the turbo is actually working harder because it has to move more air. What's the difference of power between 91 and 93? If you just do a back-to-back test between those two octanes without changing anything, there's probably not going to be any power difference between them. If when you put it in your vehicle, the computer changes the timing because of that, because it was running on the detonation threshold, then you could see a change in power. Butcher Baker, I have a 92.5 T1 intercooled MLS, head studs, T2 injector, stage 4 computer, running 20 pounds. Should I go to solid mounts when I built the new T2 turbo? I don't know. Is there a lot of flex in the mounts? I'm actually not that familiar with the motor mounts on those. I'd have to take a look and see. I haven't read up on that at all. Do I need any Hemi parts to test? What I need is a new Hemi motor. I need a new Junkyard 5.7. We don't run aviation gas on most stuff. The old aviation gas was 100 octane and it was leaded. And it's not, it's better than pump gas, but I don't think it's as good as 100 octane race gas is. It's probably cheaper. Is the 3800 making less power per PSI than the 4200 because a supercharger is heating it? No, that's not why. It's because it starts out, like I said, we were talking about earlier, if you get rid of the blower, the NA 3800, which is where you start everything from, that's what determines horsepower per PSI, is the power output of the NA motor, all but determines that. Obviously, there's efficiency if you put a really bad turbo on there, if you have a root supercharger and you have parasitic losses, those other things too. But you always start at the NA power output. And the 3800 is starting out about 100 horsepower less than the 4200, which is why it makes less power per pound of boost. Tyler, you only need the higher octane if your motor combination requires that. There are lots. I run my truck on 87 when I drive. I don't race it around really, and I'm not, trying to run it flat out across the Nevada desert. We're not trying to run the Silver State in it. But when I just drive it around and drive it back and forth to West Tech, it runs on 87. Why is the modern Hemi still called a Hemi? Because it's the biggest name in the automotive industry. You have a VVT 5.7 that you're going to toss? Why would you do that? Those are good motors. Is there room for the new distributor with sensor and the fan? I don't know. It doesn't stick out too much farther than the than that cover plate that was over it. What's a roots and what's a positive displacement blower? Well, a roots blower is a positive displacement blower. What that means is for every revolution, it displaces a given amount of air, and that's based on the displacement. We know Hemi is hemispherical, but the new Hemi is not technically a hemispherical head like the old one was. It's a semi-Hemi is what they call it. But they kept the name because they're smart, because their marketing people said, oh no, we're calling it a Hemi. Toluene is, I thought that they use that for a number of different octane booster, but I don't think that that's what they're using anymore. I've only tried as a power additive. We've only tried propylene oxide. The 2.2 seems to run good. We obviously couldn't like get in the throttle and load it or anything, but it seemed like it was okay. I just want to look and make sure that the cam is not wiped, and I want to look at the bearing surfaces and stuff. Yeah, you don't want to be playing with toluene, like you don't want to get it on you or anything. It goes in and it leaches into your DNA and rearranges it for you. And I've heard that that's bad. So I'm wondering what my hope for was when we were doing the 2.2 liter startup on the stand is, and we want to run it on the dyno too. My hope was actually that I could take the 2.5 that's in the Dodge Omni and take it out and use this 2.2 to put it in with the T2 stuff and drive the car around while I'm redoing the other motor. The thing that would stop me from doing that is that I also want to put that 2.2 liter up on the dyno with the adapter and get it running, because there's so much stuff I want to test. And if I have a good running 2.2, that would facilitate doing lots and lots of testing, which is obviously exactly what I want to do. I haven't heard from Dale and Carl, and Dale is the guy that I was talking to. I haven't heard from him in a long time about the compressed air deal. I was going to run that compressed air supercharging on the 6-liter Big Bang motor, the LS, and see if we could break the Big Bang record with the compressed air supercharging, because they had enough flow rate to do it. And obviously, if we have a charge temperature that's below 0, it would be a lot safer. And I think that we could certainly get to the destruction level of the Gen 4 rods and or pistons. I think that one of those two things would go first by making lots and lots of power. And also the compressed air supercharging, I think that they could tailor it so that we didn't have a really big torque number. Yeah, Rebel, that's what somebody was asking about, the collaboration with Dale Vaznian and Carl Stagmeyer. Is they have a compressed air supercharger setup that they've run. They already ran it at West Tech, and Jeff Smith did an excellent story on it. If you guys haven't seen it, it makes a lot of power, and they've run it around. They've run it at the track and stuff. And it's, to give you an idea how good it is, they double the power output of an NA motor at 7 pounds. So it's really, really effective because it has no parasitic loss at all, and it has ultra cold charge temperatures. What all did you have to switch out to run E85 on the 2.2? To run E85 on the 2.2, all we did was put 24-pound Ford injectors in it, and that's it. we're running with a Holley HP, so we can make the air fuel but be whatever we want. And honestly, we never even had an air fuel gauge hooked up to it. So all we were trying to do was start it. And the reason that we ran E85 is because E85 was already in the surge tank of the dyno from the last thing that we had run. So I'm like, it's running on E85 if it's going to run. We weren't doing it because it was a turbo motor or anything, because we weren't going to put any load to it. So whatever fuel we happened to have in there was what it was going to run. And all we did was light it off. And because really, for it to run, all you have to do is get it close. We just got the timing close. I think it was about 20 degrees is what Ish had set it at. And then when he verified it, he said, yeah, it's right on at 20. And then he just put some kind of fuel numbers in there so that it was spraying fuel, and it started up. So we didn't have to do anything to it. The injectors weren't anything special. We already had a pump that was pumping E85 fuel. We ran a line over to the fuel rail. We capped the end of the fuel rail because it had it in and out. We capped the other side and ran it as a deadhead, and it worked perfect. 2.2 going to be controlled by the Holley system when it goes into the GLH? Probably not. It will be controlled by the factory ECU. But I won't be running. I think right now with the Granger valve that's in it, I think the boost is very, very high on that, and I won't run it that high on the factory ECU. Say you want to up boost or more nitrous, can you just up the octane rating instead of pulling timing? Yes, you can. A lot of times, like when we run nitrous, if we run 100 shot on stuff, even on 91, a lot of times we won't pull any timing in it. Now, in the car, I would be more apt to do that just because of the temperatures of the air going in. But a lot of times with 100 shot, we don't pull any timing. Sometimes we just pull 2 degrees. If you run 100 shot on 110 octane, I would not pull any timing. Sean, Rich, you can turn those tune those early Chrysler ECUs. That's what I'm told. But not like we can at Holley on the engine dyno. It's a lot easier to do a standalone. GLH is standing mile ready. I would actually rather have it in a different vehicle than the GLH. It's not very aerodynamic. One of the Rampages would be probably a lot faster. Are there any stock block that you consider as strong as an iron LS? A 2J is probably a lot stronger. MX guy, doesn't the denser intake charge require less timing due to a faster burn? You mean with nitrous? Is that what you're talking about? The Super Turbo is also on a Holley HP. Yeah, Brian, chips and burners and stuff. I went through that when we were doing the first Honda stuff with the I think it was an S100. Oh yeah, the Daytona also would also be very aerodynamic. No, I wouldn't say 1500 would be a reliable stock bottom end race motor. I don't think I would go out and run it like that. I think a lot of guys are running it at about 1,000 horsepower and making lots of runs like that. I don't know too many people that are doing it at 1500. I don't know if that's Dulcich's Rampage or not. That might belong to the Motor Trend. I'm not rebuilding. The 2.5 is going to get built with. I have a set of Wiseco forged pistons, which we will put in that. The 2.2 would only go back together stock, but with ring gap. because that's what I want to show. We need to show people what they're doing with stock ones rather than building a dedicated one. Every build isn't designed. The stuff that I do, I'm not building motors to make lots of power. That doesn't tell anybody anything. We could eventually get there as part of the series, but people want to know what happens when I test this manifold versus this one, or this throttle body versus this one, this camshaft versus this one. That's much better information than, oh, we tried to make 600 horsepower. That we could, like I said, we could eventually get there, but it would be after lots and lots of steps. Yep, Shelby badge. Well, and I have the Shelby valve cover on the 2.5, so that's like 30 horsepower right there. I'm actually not that interested in doing the Godzilla motor. There's lots of people out there doing stuff on that already. I don't have one, and they're very expensive. So we kind of know now what they do. Yes, we will. I will be doing all of the intakes on the Dodge also, and I want to do that. Ideally, we need to do that NA and under boost. The gurney bubble. The gurney lip is the thing that really gives you the aero. Yeah, I'm not going to do a 4-valve head swap on the 2.2. Then I would just swap a motor. I wouldn't do that. And if I'm going to swap a 4-valve motor into the Omni, it's not going to be an SRT4. Yes, yeah, at 6.8, you probably would need the gurney bubble. My big bang testing wouldn't be money no object kind of thing. I would just like to have the money to test these junkyard motors and do lots of them. And it's all just time and money. So I don't have anything that I would like to do that would be the ultimate thing that would cost a lot of money, because most of them don't. Most of them are just time. I usually can get guys to port the head, and I kind of know what camshaft to put in them and what intake manifold can be done, or we could build one. And then to find out what the strength limit is of the bottom end is not really that hard. Yeah, the idea is to daily drive the GLH, and I am going to put air in it. It's not in there right now, but it will be. MX guy, I don't have any experience in that on putting the Gen 5 rods, but I think that they are as strong as the Gen 4 stuff. I know I was talking to Brian Tooley about that, and he said he thinks that they are as well. Well, Ark, you saw what Ken Miles did to the back of the Cobra when the little suitcase wouldn't fit, and that's a real thing that actually happened. Turboing the stock engine on the 3800 is probably better than swapping out a supercharged version. Although the supercharged version, as the basis for, I wouldn't put the blower on there maybe, but if you put the NA intake manifold on the blower bottom end stuff, it would have low compression and have good rods and pistons in it, and then you could maybe run more boost. But I think a lot of guys are just putting turbos on those 3800s. Have you done any testing with direct injection? Yeah, take a look at there's stuff up on the channel that with the L83 and L86 and LT1. You want the supercharger to light off a GT45. Yeah, if you're getting bigger on the turbo size, then having the supercharger could definitely be beneficial. I thought that the 4th installment of the 302 heads video was already up. If I haven't put that up there, I wonder why. That's all the really big heads. Yeah, fuel saver. If you want to save fuel, you should drive differently. That's the single biggest thing you can do. And then you could go down the rabbit hole on these eco motor guys that are doing all kinds of really cool stuff to try to improve fuel mileage. But again, they're driving to try to improve fuel mileage, which a lot of guys don't do. Yes, all the camshafts can be run with a turbo or a blower or nitrous. So, Sir Charles, are you saying that the LS is unrivaled in its in its ability? I would like to see. Does anybody know? And I'll have to leave in about 3 minutes. But does anybody know? Are there any videos out on 2J stock bottom end stuff? Have you guys seen any videos on people trying to make power with like what we did with the LS, like the Big Bang stuff, where it's the stock bottom end, just ring gap, stock piston, stock rod, stock crank, all that? Because usually what they do is put pistons and rods in them and sometimes billet cranks. And then the block obviously is ultra strong already, but I haven't seen people doing stuff on the 2J. It's also kind of small compared to an LS, but I haven't seen them doing that on just the stock bottom end stuff with just ring gap. Stefan, Richard, be great to see ITB testing there. I have those videos up already. I did it on I did the Speedmaster stuff. I did a 331 with those. I also did a 408 with those. I haven't run the cross ram version of that on the Ford. I have done that on the LS. Yeah, the VMAXs were cool, and so were the CBX. That it didn't make as much power as a VMAX, but they were kind of cool, a 6-cylinder. I like the turbocharged Ninjas back in the day, and the little turbocharged 500 Hondas. Obviously, a Hayabusa. I think a Hayabusa is probably that's got to be near 200 horsepower, right? Or is it like 185 or 190? So, Adrian, you're saying that you've taken a 2J. There's a stock bottom end, stock rods, crank, piston, just ring gap, and then you've made 1,000 horsepower with those. I haven't done the V6s that are in the 3000 GTs. Those are kind of cool, though. Okay, guys, one more minute. I would actually like to dyno a rotary, which would be cool because I've never run one on the engine dyno. I'd also like to dyno my 3-cylinder Chevy Sprint motor. But again, got to make an adapter plate to make it work. So it's all adapter plates for everything. Okay, guys, I got to get going for tonight. Thank you all for showing up. Hopefully you guys have all checked out the video. Make sure do the comparison between the 4200 and the 3800, and then the startup on the, it's interesting. A lot of guys were saying that on the videos on the 3800, they were all seeing wires arcing and all kinds of stuff, and that they saw mice running around in the background. I'm glad they all see that. That's awesome stuff. Thanks for showing up, guys. I will see you all tomorrow.